Are you witnessing a historic celebration or a personal performance disguised with flags and fireworks? When the White House announced that a massive military parade would be held on June 14, 2025, the nation immediately erupted in conversation. It wasn't just because it marked the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army, but because this date also happens to be President Donald Trump's 79th birthday. Was this a mere coincidence or a carefully calculated move? In a time when America is deeply divided, this decision sparked a fiery debate about national honor, personal ego, and the blurry line between the two. On the morning of May 2, 2025, the entire United States was woken up by a striking announcement from the White House. A grand military parade would be held on June 14 to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States Army. The news spread like wildfire, drawing the attention not only of the media but also of people across the country. This was no ordinary event. The 250-year milestone carried deep significance. It marked a long journey, starting from the early days of the nation when small militia units stood together in the fight for independence, to the point where the U.S. Army had become one of the most powerful military forces in the world. The ceremony would take place right in the heart of Washington, D.C., along Constitution Avenue, a setting both solemn and full of energy. Over 6,600 soldiers would march down the avenue, followed by 150 military vehicles roaring through the streets and 50 fighter jets tearing across the sky. And to add to the grandeur, the entire night sky over the National Mall would light up with a spectacular fireworks display, blending with the lively sounds of festivals. Everything seemed set for the United States to celebrate a glorious chapter in its history. But then, one detail caught everyone's attention. In fact, it caused more buzz than the parade itself. June 14 was also President Donald Trump's 79th birthday. A coincidence? Or a carefully orchestrated move? The White House quickly reassured the public that the event was meant to honor the country, not an individual. Yet, in such a politically sensitive climate, many couldn't help but remain skeptical. With such a significant event, on the exact day of the president's birthday, and focusing so much on military strength, Trump's image seemed to cast a shadow over the entire event, whether intended or not. And from there, the debates began to erupt, even louder than the sound of tanks revving their engines. When the White House announced the parade plans on May 20, 2025, social media and American news outlets erupted. What grabbed people's attention wasn't just the grand scale of the event, but the surprising coincidence. June 14th, the date of the parade, just happens to be President Donald Trump's 79th birthday. Almost instantly, many began to question, is this just another display of ego? Some voices argued that the event seemed more like a birthday party wrapped in the colors of the flag and the sound of the national anthem, designed to honor Trump personally rather than the army or the country. This feeling only grew stronger when people compared it to past commemorations, which were always held with reverence, focusing on the shared values of the nation. But this time, with the strange coincidence of the date, some citizens began to feel that the event lacked focus. Instead of feeling pride, many couldn't help but scoff, worried that the historical significance would be overshadowed by Trump's personal involvement. And so the debate raged on, raising the question, is this truly a national celebration, or just a stage for an individual to flaunt their power? The public wasn't the only group with concerns. Even local government officials weren't fully on board. When the parade details were made public, Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser didn't hesitate to speak out against it, saying, "The streets of the Capitol are not meant for tanks." Can you imagine? Dozens of massive, imposing tanks rolling down streets usually filled with buses and bicycles. It's not just a hard image to picture, it could severely impact the city's infrastructure. But the issue didn't stop there. Other officials voiced concerns that this event might no longer be a commemoration, but rather a display of political power. The sight of military convoys marching through the Capitol could send a concerning message to many citizens. In America that's strong, yes, but perhaps too authoritarian, which doesn't exactly align with democratic value. For President Trump, however, the parade wasn't just an event. It was an opportunity to showcase national power. He openly defended the estimated $92 million 0 cents cost of the 2017 parade, claiming that it was a small price to pay considering the immense symbolic value it brought. For him, it was time for America to show pride in its military strength, from cutting-edge missiles to powerful tanks, and there was no reason to hide it. This was a chance to prove to the world that the US isn't just making empty boasts, but truly possesses unmatched military power. And that's why he stood firmly behind the parade plans. It wasn't just an event, but a bold declaration of America's place on the world stage. When we think of parades in America, images of grand processions, roaring tanks, jets soaring through the sky, and soldiers marching in perfect unison come to mind. But behind the military music and the dazzling fireworks, there lies a deep historical narrative. Moments when the United States not only showcased its strength, but also told the world its story. Let's start with 1991, perhaps the most pride-filled parade for Americans in the 20th century. It followed the victory in the Gulf War. Over 8,000 soldiers and hundreds of military vehicles marched down Constitution Avenue in Washington, D.C. Leading the procession was General Norman Schwarzkopf, the hero who commanded the coalition forces during Operation Desert Storm. He didn't just lead the troops, he led an indescribable emotion felt by over 200 spectators lining the streets. A sense of trust, pride, and gratitude. The atmosphere that day felt like a celebration, a declaration. America had triumphed and wasn't afraid to show it. But the US doesn't only parade after victories. Each military procession throughout history has had a special reason behind it. Take 1961, for instance. During President John F. Kennedy's inauguration, the parade wasn't merely a ceremonial transfer of power. It carried a powerful underlying message amidst the Cold War. America remained strong, prepared to defend its values and position on the world stage. Then there was 1946, when World War II had ended, and the people of New York gathered in droves to greet the 82nd Airborne Division. Tears were hard to hide as they watched the soldiers, the sons and daughters who had returned from the hardships of war. The parade that year wasn't just to honor them, but also to allow the entire nation to express its gratitude. Looking back even further to 1919, New York was once again filled with flags and flowers to welcome home American soldiers returning from World War I. In every synchronized step, the people could feel the sacrifices, courage, and resilience that defined those who fought. Even during war, parades still happened. In 1942, with World War II still raging, Washington, D.C. held a grand parade in May. This wasn't for celebration, but to lift the spirits of both the soldiers and the citizens. Even earlier in 1939, as the shadow of war began to loom over the world, the US held a parade for Army Day. It was a declaration. America was ready to step into the fight if necessary. And if you're curious about the very first parade in American history, let's go back to 1865. When the Civil War ended, more than 145,000 soldiers marched through Washington, D.C. It wasn't just a military event. It marked the end of a brutal civil war and the beginning of a united America, reborn from its ruins. From war to peace, from victory to hope, parades in American history have always been tied to moments the entire nation needed to remember, to rise together, and to move forward united. When the White House announced the date for the parade, June 14th, which also happens to be President Donald Trump's 79th birthday, many people raised an eyebrow and began questioning, is this a national event or just a birthday celebration in disguise? It's easy to understand why some members of the public were skeptical. To them, the timing of the parade seemed a little too coincidental. They worried that the event was no longer just about celebrating the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army's founding, but rather turning into a display of personal grandeur. Some even likened it to printing the organizer's face on wedding invitation cards, a little out of place for the occasion. Mixing personal elements into a moment meant to honor military history, to many, seemed inappropriate and somewhat diluted the sacred value the event should hold. However, amid these debates, there were those who urged others not to let personal doubts overshadow the greater purpose. After all, no matter when it occurred, the parade was still meant to honor the long journey the U.S. Army has taken, from the early militia during the Revolution to becoming one of the most powerful military forces in the world. It was a time for America to reflect, to pay tribute to the fallen soldiers, and to demonstrate to the world that their military strength lies not only in weapons, but in their spirit and history. And above all, for many Americans, Such a parade isn't just about tanks and planes marching down the streets. It's a march of pride, of memories, and of national unity. June 14, 2025 will undoubtedly be a day to remember, not only because it marks the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army's founding, but also as an opportunity for Americans to showcase their national pride and affirm their country's military strength. It will be a moment to reflect on the long and challenging journey the U.S. military has traveled, from its humble beginnings to becoming one of the world's most formidable forces. However, what makes this event especially noteworthy and somewhat controversial is the uncanny coincidence of it falling on President Trump's 79th birthday. Because of this, many people can't help but ask, is this a true national celebration or just a display of personal power? The debates surrounding the motives behind this parade have led some to feel that the event's historical significance and solemnity might be overshadowed. Regardless of the controversies, one thing remains clear. This is an important event. It is a chance to honor the soldiers who sacrificed for the greatness of the nation, while also providing an opportunity to reflect on the political and strategic viewpoints of President Trump, as well as the military might of the United States. Whether people agree or not, this event is bound to attract attention and will surely continue to spark discussion for a long time to come.